Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my space on the Russian and Ukraine conflict. I'm going to be joined by Master Sheikh real soon, and he obviously will offer a European perspective that I can't. Here he is. I'm going to invite him to be a co-host and add him. Um, so Master Sheikh, you've been invited to be a co-host. There we go. All right.
Yeah, good
And
evening, Richard. How are
good
things?
good afternoon over here in Montana. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Warm outside, spring is coming. I can definitely imagine myself in the beer gardens and street walk cafes soon. So that's
Yes.
good.
Well, I think we're probably at a similar latitude. So, spring is here as well out here in Montana. It's fairly warm. You can walk around without a coat and more sunlight. It's just great.
Yeah, days are longer as well.
Definitely.
Did you
Um,
already have the clock change for like daylight saving or something like that?
Well, yes. So daylight savings was last. I always forget whether we're like doing daylight savings or we're ended daylight savings. But yeah, we moved the clock forward, so we lost an hour on
Yeah, we're
Sunday.
doing that next weekend, I think. Usually, this is a bit earlier than I expected. That's why I'm asking. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
but I don't know if you heard the news, but there was a monumental change in geopolitics that occurred, or at least continental politics. So the Senate voted to cancel daylight savings time or
yeah,
make
we're
it
having the
permanent.
same kinds of discussions in the EU at the moment, but we're still doing it this year.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that will happen, but I do think I've heard some pretty convincing arguments that the act of losing an hour of sleep like causes on the margin heart attacks and car accidents. And so whatever energy you might save, you're like offset it with unintended consequences. So I don't know. um we'll see what happens. But
yeah, but when you turn the clock back, you have an hour of extra an hour of sleep, so that's better. So everyone's always complaining in the spring, but
yes,
yeah.
here I'm gonna my dog is barking at nothing as usual. I'm gonna bring him inside. All right. Well, let's start talking about what's happening. I mean, we're in week three, and
Yeah, the fourth week has started.
or the fourth week has started. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So obviously, if there were any hope of a knockout punch by the Russians, and basically there would be some fighting, there'd be a lot of intimidation. He would quote denazify Kiev and um, put in his own rulers or whatever, and it would be a somewhat, at least, bloodless invasion, similar to annexing Crimea or something like that. That clearly is not happening, and I don't want to jump in on a prediction either way, but it this is progressing very slowly, and there is a lot of reason to believe that there's serious pushback by an army that is unquestionably outgunned and outmanned. So I just think there is a great deal of there's a big question mark in the air on this. And what I found fascinating was yesterday, and you well, first off, before I go into I want to talk about Putin's speech, but I guess before I go into that, because that's almost a different subject, do you want to talk about like your assessment of military advancements and retreats?
Well, I'm in no way a military expert, but it's definitely clear that the original plan that Putin might have had about taking Crimea, taking Kiev or taking the entirety of Ukraine in 3 days, that didn't turn out. Then they sort of leaked, quote unquote, some documents about, well, we actually planned to do this in 2 weeks, but now 2 weeks have passed and there's no significant movements there. So I think that they're probably starting to get war fatigue. They're not really advancing anywhere. I mean, Ukraine is being taken from four sides: from the north, from the northeast, the east, and the south. The only place where there's significant movements are in the south with the siege of Mariupol. We see that it's a huge tragedy. Civilian areas getting
Yeah.
bombed and shelled, and it's really horrific. But not much movement around Kiev or Kharkiv. These other places have been pretty much in a stalemate for weeks now. So that's where we
Oh,
are at this moment.
actually, Master Shake, you seem to be breaking up here. I don't know. Is this just on my end or?
Well, communication seems to be good here. Can you hear me? Hello? And it's the first time something like that has happened.
Yeah, I can. Okay, I hear you now. We had about a minute where you would go off and on. I don't know if that's just me,
Well, I
but
had
keep
some
going.
interference as well. But if you can hear me now, I think that should be good because I have a pretty
Yes.
good internet connection.
Okay.
So what I was saying is that we don't really see a lot of movements on the part of Russia. Ukraine is being taken from four sides, and the only one where there are significant movements is the south, like the siege of Mariupol and things there, but not a lot of movement on the other fronts. So the Russians are pretty much in a stalemate, I would say. But however, they did bomb this military base near the border with Poland some time ago, and there's definitely some movement towards escalation on that part. But as far as well, yesterday some prime ministers from Poland, Czech Republic, I think, and other places visited Kiev. So if that's any indication, then it's pretty safe to move there. So they don't really control the area there.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk about Putin a little bit because I read his remarks from either yesterday or the day before. They've been translated and subtitled. There's actually a video of it. And yeah, I mean, my friend Mark said this was Bane tier type stuff, and I don't think he's exaggerating too much when he says that. He basically talked about a purification of Russian society, and he talked about there are these people out there who think of themselves as of a higher caste or of a higher race. Even I think he used both of those terms, and they make money in Russia, but they live in Miami or the French Riviera, and we are going to undergo, they aren't really part of us, and we're going to undergo a cleansing or purification of some kind. um, Now, first off, that sounds like someone who is absolutely doubling down. There is no diplomatic off ramp. It's
Well, I
also
think he also said that they might be making money in Russia. They also live in Russia, but sort of in their minds, they're living in
right.
the West or something like that.
Well, yeah, let me get into the details of that because I guess when most people hear that, it seems like, if you're a liberal of any kind, if you even think about protesting this war, you're out. We're going to get rid of you. You won't survive this. Um, but I think I've heard other people say that that was specifically directed at oligarchs. And these are the oligarchs that are Putin's oligarchs effectively. These are the ones that he brought to heel and that he works with, but who aren't exactly on his side. And you have a lot of examples of like their super yachts getting seized and assets frozen in the West, fleeing to Israel in some cases. Um, but it's almost like this will be Putin's chance just to knock out even like his loyal entourage. It's like you are either with me or you're against me. You've been useful in the past, but this is how we're going forward. So some people say, again, some people think it was directed at like any form of anti-war sentiment or liberalism or pro-Western feelings, cosmopolitanism, or some people said it was directed specifically at the oligarchs. Um, all that I can say, I mean, this is clearly someone who's absolutely doubling down. He sees this as this isn't just like Crimea annexation or even a 2008 campaign in Georgia. This is a full transformation of Russian society. Am I overstating matters?
Well, it's important. I think today I saw some reports of these flight trackers seeing a lot of private jets leaving and flying towards Dubai. And
I
at the
saw
same
that.
time, there also were some of Russia's government planes leaving Moscow and flying towards the Ural Mountains, where this bunker, Putin's command center, is located. So there were some people suggesting that that might mean that, well, they're ready for sort of attack or something like that, preparing for something. But then those same planes sort of didn't land, or some of them landed, but they flew back or something like that. So
Huh.
a lot of mixed reporting about that. But yeah, I think that definitely the opposition has been completely eradicated in Russia as of the beginning of this war, and there really is no room for dissent or things like that. Putin is completely cracking down and destroying any opposition that might be towards the war or anything. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, some protest movements are rising in Russia. There was this video of this TV producer, news producer, going out with the sign protesting the war,
Yeah.
uh, being offered asylum in France or in other places. So yeah, this is a situation where we're at. The sort of grip on power is being really strengthened, and Putin's really angry, and I think it's mostly because he hasn't seen any this Ukrainian campaign as a success, and he's basically lashing out against the people he sort of blames for this misconduct or this failure.
Right. And I also don't think there's any other choices. I mean, I've seen this from both sides. I've seen this from people who are sympathetic towards Ukraine and antagonistic towards Russia. I've also seen this from traditionalist types, and I've said as much is that we're kind of entering a world of civilizational states, these massive blocks, and these sanctions. If Putin went in for 48 hours and then pulled out, I think you probably could say, well, maybe they're going to kind of lift these sanctions. It was a mistake. He wanted to denazify, whatever, and it's over. But 3 weeks on, atrocities are on everyone's phone and screen. He's doubling down. He cannot do anything but either continue a slog or begin to escalate. And there are going to be more and more images of maternity wards being bombed and women, children, and men laying in the street. mutilated. I mean, it's going to get worse. There's possible of even more serious escalation than that, and you can't turn back. And so you almost have to start to create a new world order in which Russia is a kind of civilizational state of its own, totally disconnected from the West in a Cold War like fashion. And what I think all these kind of Russia partisans are talking about is basically the friendship treaty that was signed with China before the war, 2 weeks before the war, that promised unlimited friendship, and that basically Russia is going to be part of this new Eurasian bloc, and this is transformative. We're going to have civilizational states across the East. I mean, I basically agree with that. I mean, I think that that is what's happening. I mean, I would just say to all these Russia partisans, I mean, first off, the Russian civilizational state is not going to be some kind of trad empire that you imagine. It is going to be focused entirely on Putin, and it's going to have all of the problems that are present in Russia for at least 30 years and longer than that. And being aligned with China, being a kind of like source of petrol for China. I mean, the idea that like this new Eurasianism is something that I would wish upon Russians just should not even be countenanced. I mean, I would not support such an if I were a Russian patriot, I would not support such an arrangement in a million years. And yet, this is what you hear from the, Russian aligned media, all these kind of alternative accounts that are, oh, I'm left wing, I'm right wing, I have Z in my profile. This is all they're talking about. The West is going to die and it's decadent, and they're going to be a new Eurasian trad empire in the East. I mean, I think they're right to a certain extent. I do think that that is happening. I think they're completely wrong if they think this is going to be good for average Russians or civilization in general. But what do
Yeah,
you think
I've been
about
reading these sort of things about Eurasianism and Russia and China for years. Once I first started my interest in global politics, and wouldn't be that I would be very skeptical about this Russia-China relation. Well, of course, in Russia-China, this sort of Russia-China alliance, which they are talking about, China would be the dominating power there.
yeah.
But again, people have been talking about Russia being aligned with China for years, and about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and things like that. That well, if Russia starts a war, then China is going to join, or something like that. But it never really has come to fruition, and I don't think it's certainly too early to say that something like that could happen now. Um, as far as Russian advances in Ukraine, well, now they're asking help for to China from China. They're asking additional forces from Syria, as I've read, and of course they're using the Chechen army there.
Hmm.
Doesn't look good for them.
Using Africans, I've also seen reports of.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. I mean, Russia was supposed to be this tough, strong military and this strong power, but they're unable to do this Ukraine operation without support from others. That doesn't really look good for Putin, I would say.
No, I don't think any of it looks good. I mean, I again, I think that the breakdown of like true globalization, unipolar world, it's neoliberal America everywhere. Yeah, that could never last for long. It was kind of always based on contradictions. I do see like large civilizational states as the future, but um, so it is kind of natural, and in some ways, this war is a turning point. We can't go back after this. So I agree with them on this level. I would say I would add one thing to all these people who are like talking big about this. the way that they articulate it is either that America and Western Europe are just inherently globalist and they can't do this as well, you know, or they basically, it's kind of like for thee but not for me in a way. These pro-Russian Westerners,
The
the
Traitors
traitors,
Coalition.
the traitors coalition, so to speak, that they for the West, they, you know, they're like, oh, the EU, what a joke! It's just a bunch of transgendered feminist, you know, talking about their pronouns all day. That's all the EU is. And you know, America is going down in flames, you know, soon enough. Or they like, we believe in the nation state, or we believe in secession, or whatever. So what I'm saying is that they acknowledge a reality, which I also acknowledge, which is that the world is kind of if we ever had pure globalism, it is breaking down. And that, like the Chimerica relationship, for instance, you know, made in China, designed in California, whatever, is this going to unwind? Is this going to change? I don't know. I think it will. I don't know how that nut is going to be cracked, but like, I acknowledge the reality of these geopolitical blocks. But what's so curious about the Traders Coalition is that they never acknowledge that for us. So it's like America's a joke, the EU's a joke, NATO's a joke, and but what we're actually seeing is, like, in this bifurcation world, we're going to see something different happen in NATO and the West and America. We just have to, in a way. What do you think
Yeah,
about
and
that? A bit long-winded, but go
in
ahead.
Europe, there's this mood of cautious optimism.
Yeah.
Today, our prime minister gave his sort of, I guess, the equivalent of the State of the Union address to the parliament. And it was actually on a very positive note that we were seeing this unification of Europe, that we're all together in this.
Hmm.
And yeah, the energy prices might be high and inflation, etc. But well, at least we don't have to fight a war like the Ukrainians do. But we have to support their effort, and through this, we will have more unification. And in the end, it will be very good for Europe and for everyone. Well, everyone in the West, at least.
Hmm.
So yeah, I definitely agree with this notion. I see this optimism about this, that well, this Ukraine situation has really created this mood of Europe coming together and showing strength and resolve. And I think it's a, from this perspective, of course, this is a good thing. Of course, it's might be it's very tragic that that it has to happen because of a war in
Right.
Ukraine, but I think this is a good thing for the West, definitely for Europe. And yeah, but as far as this more of a division within this globalism, that we're going to see maybe the China America this arrangement coming to an end. I don't think it's going to be that soon. I think it
Huh.
definitely is going towards the end, but I don't think it's going to happen that quickly. But
Oh
again, I might
no.
be
I mean,
wrong. Yeah.
if it happened quickly, like, I don't even know what, I don't, you know, there would be nothing on the shelves and in stores. I mean, it would be just a massive dislocation. I mean, I think I again, I don't know. It seems like this Chimerica is wound up so tight that to unwind it is either going to take a very large amount of time, or would just create a massive dislocation. So I don't. Again, I simply don't know how the nut is going to be cracked on that, and I don't quite understand what China wants. I do think that China doesn't want to just be the factory for the world forever. I think China wants to develop its own, like, consuming middle class. I mean, there was a time I remember in like the birth of the iPhone, where there are all these articles in the New York Times or whatever about how there's this Foxconn worker working 12 hours a day building the iPhone, and it's illegal for him to buy this product. All this this kind of thing.
And
I don't
there's
think
suicide nets outside of the factory because they're jumping off
exactly.
the roof and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Make sure you get your paycheck before you throw yourself off a building. Um, but I mean, and look, some of that was exaggerated and whatever. But like, I don't think China just wants that forever. But like how it unwinds that within itself is also a question, and I don't know the answer to these questions. I think we'll just kind of um, wait and see. But I do think that there's just a very positive energy towards European unification. NATO has regained its purpose and its meaning, and I don't know. There's American nationalism is very different than, well, it can have different varieties. It can flip into isolationism or some of the MAGA stuff that we see, but there is a kind of American nationalism that I can even remember from my youth that you would see among many liberals who are just kind of like, well, we need to look out for Japan, look out for China, let's make things here, pro worker, a kind of like centrist nationalism. And I that seemed impossible like a month ago, and I think it almost seems possible now because the political climate has changed to such a degree.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I also think that China is more going inwards. I mean, Xi hasn't been on the foreign visit ever since COVID started. It's more of a they're more of concerned about what's going on inside of China,
Hmm.
and I don't really see them. Of course, they are a global power, and of course they have some ambition towards that. But I don't really see them doing this. This is the thing what the Soviet Union did. It's not as ideological anymore. So
No.
it's really difficult to say. But as far as the West goes, yeah, definitely there is this optimism, and we're sort of going back maybe on this um, these notions of nationalism and everything should be made here, and we shouldn't rely that much on energy providers like Russia. We need our own energy and things like that. So I think that's
Yeah.
definitely a positive thing.
Yeah. Well, before we start letting in some of our audience, in that regard, if you would like to ask a question, you can make a request now. Um, so there's been a debate in the United States about the no-fly zone. So Zelensky gave an address to Congress, and he uh, rather clunkily evoked Martin Luther King and said, he had a dream, I have a need, we need a no-fly zone. Okay, fair enough. But Joe Biden has explicitly said that that's not happening. You have some kind of rumblings in Congress about we should do a no-fly zone. I'm not sure that they really know what that means and that it should be taken seriously outside of just like euphemistic fervor for on behalf of Ukraine. Um, but so I don't think that's happening. Now, of course, you could quite reasonably argue that simply supplying weapons, even if they're defensive, is, on some level attacking Russia. And I think that is I think it really is a matter of degree, and there is a kind of ambiguity there of where that tipping point is. Is it with providing MiG airplanes that are going to be flown by Ukrainians? Is that kind of a tipping point? Is it just providing anything? Is that a tipping point, or is it you have to have NATO soldiers fighting against Russians to trigger the all for one article in NATO, in the NATO alliance. I don't know where that point is, but if we assume that Putin is like he is in for a dollar, or what is it, in for a penny, in for a pound. He has doubled down. There is no off ramp here. No one can convince him to just kind of let it go, draw back, make some arrangement. That he is fully end this, and both sides are resolved in this way, um, what do you think about escalation in terms of like, let's say this drags on another 3 weeks, and Russia is really feeling the sting of the sanctions. There's a demoralized army. Um, on the home front, there's stirrings. What I mean, what does Putin want? I mean, what kind of escalation is possible? Obviously, we can talk about a mushroom cloud in cities. I don't think that's going to happen. But like, what what does he want? Does Putin want greater escalation? Because that in some ways like increases the energy of everything, makes his country more resolved. What do you how do you see this?
Well, I don't really think that there is a rational way to analyze this. If we look at this war and how it was started, well, of course, we can make the argument that wars have been started for lesser reasons. And, well, Putin obviously thinks that he has a reason to start a war. But I don't really, this is probably one of the most pointless and unnecessary wars, in my opinion, at least. And as far as escalation and no-fly zone go, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, and there was a slight glitch on my screen, but I definitely think that there should be
Hello?
a no-fly zone. Eastern European countries are already supporting this, saying that yes, there should be a no-fly zone. But the question is, how would it be justified? Of course, the United Nations Security Council is a no-go because Russia will
Uh,
veto
hello?
everything,
Yeah.
and
Please mute yourself.
perhaps they could do a vote in the General Assembly, sort of do the no-fly zone on humanitarian grounds, or maybe just the western part of Ukraine. I don't really know, but I think we're being overly pessimistic or fear mongering about what would happen if Russian planes would be shot down. There already is a precedent of NATO shooting down Russian planes, and nothing happened.
Right.
In 2015, the Turkish armed forces shot down a Russian bomber who was violating their airspace. And well, for a while there was screaming about World War III, that this is terrible. Russian politicians talked about, well, we shouldn't buy Turkish tomatoes and things like that. But in the end, it's sort of hushed down, and then they sort of backed off, and they no longer flew these routes near the Turkey's borders. So maybe there should be some action that would sort of bloody Russia's nose a bit, having some planes shot down and see how they react. But again, there's a lot of speculation about what the reaction would be, that it might go if other countries get involved, NATO countries, that wouldn't be good. But there should be some sort of consensus in the world about this that we don't have at the moment.
Yes.
Um, so that I
Well,
think that's the biggest problem.
I actually tend to agree because you see a lot of these people who the kind of traders light, the kind of paleos that are just like, oh well, if you just announce a no-fly zone, then the world is over, kind of thing. And it is fear mongering, and it isn't entirely serious. And these are the same people who have been urging Ukrainians to just lose, just give up so that you can save lives or something. So basically, these people have no conception of human nature saying something like this. But they are, yeah, they clearly just want they want to just gift Ukraine to Russia, and it will be over more quickly, and so on. And they're also saying that we can't do the no-fly zone. I mean, I agree. I think it has to be articulated really well. I mean, no one wants to just go in there and create some massive escalation without a plan or an articulated policy. And it could be done. I mean, I think Ukraine will end up being divided, but it could be done in like a portion of Ukraine that where you could justify that on humanitarian reasons of I mean and not just justify it, that would be the fundamental reason in the sense that you can flee these cities that are being shelled. There's going to be a protected space, and that would kind of emerge as a Western Ukraine, at the end of the day, that would be under NATO protection. I'm kind of spitballing in a way, but I think that like something like the sanctions has been that's taken place. The moral condemnation has taken place. It's over. I think sure, if you could talk to Putin, talk him into some agreement, good luck at that. I would obviously support the end of the bloodshed, but I just don't see that happening. And so it's kind of time for some strategic move that isn't overly bold and insane, and it's just going to, let's nuke Moscow, or like, no, of course no one in their right mind would support that, but some move that's subtle, that is an escalation, that changes the game, but that is not in any way suicidal, or or is going to back Putin in a quarter where he just wants to end it all, as opposed to lose. So there is like some leeway in there, and I hope there's some kind of creativity towards doing that. I think I would in the Ukraine area that has not been advanced upon. I think something like we're going to have a no-fly zone in this limited area to protect Ukrainians. That seems like a way of escalating in a nuanced and subtle fashion. Throwing it out there. Okay, let's take some questions. So I will just go down the line here. I'll let some other people in. So let eternal.
Yes, hello, gentlemen. I have a quick question, a comment, then a question about the no-fly zone. What I find interesting is that I think the idea of actually enforcing it is a bit far-fetched, because
Is anybody
the
speaking?
West has had so much. Yes, the
Sorry.
West has had so many problems just delivering weapon systems, such as the MiG aircraft through Poland, and that failed. And the one way they can enforce it is maybe delivering some missile systems like the S-300s from other nations in the West. But that's also not been an easy road to go. And about airspace, one thing are the
This
aircraft, completely
Russia,
other.
but then I'm saying it's not.
Yeah,
Please
the
mute yourself. Don't.
completely
Yeah.
different thing is enforcing a clear airspace from artillery attacks, from ballistic missile attacks. So, well, you can try to stop ballistic missiles, but I think artillery, the one that they are shelling the cities of Ukraine, that's a completely other story. I'm not a military expert, but I think that they're in a bit of a struggle there. And I'm not that optimistic on the airspace. The control of the airspace, but we'll see how it goes. And I wanted to just pivot back with a quick question about the situation of Belarus. At the first days of the conflict, there were some talks of Belarus being sending their armies into Ukraine and into the conflict. But as we saw, some top-ranking generals resigned. I wouldn't say there was a mutiny, but there was some disagreements in the top echelons of the military, and since then, Lukashenko has come out with different kinds of statements, and you can see that he's holding back. So, despite
Interesting.
almost the so-called union state that we've been building so far, I think he's still kind of holding back, and I do not know what's the true reason for him to doing that. But maybe you have some ideas.
Well, today there was a report on Russian news that starting midnight, starting tomorrow, starting at midnight, there will no longer be any passport checks or any sort of stops on the border between Belarus and Russia, essentially having free movement between the countries. So I think that's telling, perhaps. But Belarus is definitely, it's a part of Russia now. It's not no longer an independent state. It's completely integrated with Russia militarily, economically. It just sort of exists as a separate entity, just on paper, in my view.
Hmm. But have you heard anything about Belarusians being wary of battle? I mean, I remember hearing about that 2 weeks ago, and I haven't heard much about it since.
Well, Belarus is sort of holding back on joining the Russian forces in Ukraine, but of course, it's very clear that the Russians are already using Belarusian military infrastructure, using their territory to do these attacks on Ukraine. So
Right.
they're sort of in, but not completely in. There were reports of Belarusian troops moving into Ukraine, but there hasn't been any confirmation of that.
All right. Okay. Laser Cassette. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
This really isn't so much a question, just a thing I noted when I was just looking online today. Chronologically, we are at the point about 3 weeks in that during the 2003 Iraq invasion, Baghdad had already fallen to the U.S. And I was just thought that would be an interesting point to
Oh,
point.
okay. Is everyone? Are you hearing him, Master Shake? I'm getting a lot of
No,
touch and go.
I didn't hear him.
Oh, I
It's breaking up.
apologize. Um, if you're not able to hear me, I'll relinquish my.
I just don't think you have good reception. So I'm sorry about that. I'm going to move on though.
No problem.
Okay, Bingo Bongo, you've got the floor.
Hi, yeah, thanks for taking me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make this a brief question, but it might be like a very long answer. Do you care to speculate on the future of like the populist right, specifically in the United States, if not in Europe, like, and more specifically, like, is paleo isolationism in the United States, like, is that moment over, or is this such a hinge moment in human events that like speculating on something like that is not even useful at this stage?
Well, I think it's useful. I mean, I've already said it. I think the populist moment is over. Period. And so, there are different like aspects to populism that where distinction should be made. So there is a paleo conservative movement. I mean, something that I was personally involved with to some degree, in the sense of, I was an editor at the American Conservative magazine for a time, and I was reading that stuff certainly when I got out of college. My sense is that these people see everything through the lens of the Iraq War. And, it's kind of that if everything, if you all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so they keep framing this as like we're non interventionist or something. And it's kind of like, I get it, but what is your possible point? Like, Russia has intervened, it has invaded a country. This is a very serious thing. NATO, which all of you guys wanted us to get out of for understandable reasons, after the Cold War, now has meaning. So, what you are saying by claiming I'm a non-interventionist basically means that you don't want NATO to serve any kind of purpose. You don't want to offer aid and energy to Ukraine, and you want to allow Russia to intervene. And it's just a very strange way of looking at it. And they keep calling like Joe Biden a warmonger or something when Joe Biden has acted in a reasonable manner. And he knows the Cold War. He's used to that. So I just think the whole paleo thing, it's like, we used to joke in this movement that for a neoconservative, it's always 1939 or something. Hitler is about to rise. But for these guys, it seems to always be 2003. And they just have to kind of like black pill everyone on any form of the use of force or any form of of NATO, even though it has a lot of historical precedent. So I just find their commentary very weak. They want to frame everything in a certain way that makes sense to them, but that's not what the world is like. They're misunderstanding phenomena, and thus they have nothing really to say about it, nothing important to say about it. I think Trump is just done. I don't. He can't he can't walk back this stuff. And in terms of the European right, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just gonna say there can't be that. First of all, I'm not even on the right. I'm not even a white person to begin with. But like, I was just gonna
Yeah,
say
sure.
that there can't be that many people for whom like the Iraq War was obviously going to be a debacle, and this is clearly an instance where like this is the closest thing to a just war that I've seen in my lifetime, I guess, besides maybe the Afghanistan war. Sorry, I'm done. I didn't mean to interject.
No. I mean, I think
I
the
think
paleo
the biggest
movement is very
problem with
small. Go ahead.
I think the biggest problem with the Iraq war is not that much the war itself, the invasion of Iraq, but the handling of it afterwards. So that's the biggest failure, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of American foreign policy, and especially in Iraq, the military operation itself was very successful. I mean, but the way they handled it politically, the way they organized the rebuilding of Iraq afterwards, that was the real problem. And I think many people sort of forget about that. They sort of just think the war about just the war, but they don't really sort of divide it in that way. But I've always been skeptical of this, what we now call the Traitors Coalition. At least here in Europe, it looks like all these people who are pro-Putin have now been basically shut down. I don't really see much of a political future for people like Le Pen in France, Salvini in Italy. There are also politicians here in Eastern Europe who had some friendly things to say about Russia and Putin, of course, but they're no longer. I don't see any political future for them. But as far as my observations from the outside, looking at the American, this libertarian, anti-interventionist paleocon, I always sort of looked at it very skeptically, and it's always, to me, it seemed very provincial. This very provincial kind of country pumpkin thinking about everything would be just very simple if we would just trade with people and not intervene in foreign wars and things like that. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't take that seriously because the United States won the Second World War, and by doing so, they became this indispensable power in a way. They gained the most out of this World War victory and what came afterwards. I mean, and following the Second World War, America had the majority of the gold reserves on the planet. They had the majority of industry on the planet, and it all was because of this victory in the war. And you can no longer be isolationist afterwards. And I think they don't really take history or world history seriously if they think that, well, we're just going to be isolationists. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I basically agree. I think there's a huge naivete to it, and I think particularly from the libertarians, where free trade is again, this is my opinion, my perspective. Um, they seem to operate under this assumption that if militaries just went away, like it all vanished, no one could engage in war outside of defense with sticks and stones or something, that we would all be like somehow united as a globe. Like everyone would have their little country, but we trade with each other, and everyone would be rich and it'd be great, and you maintain national distinctions or whatever. This is just a fundamental fantasy, and the reason why there is some form of globalization is because of political and military accomplishments. So you have free trade because there is a power in the world that in a way neutralizes a lot of these aggressions
and also
and
enforces this free trade agreements arrangement.
I
right.
guess their fantasy is like confederated city-states that somehow are able to retain their cultural character or something like that.
Right. Well, maybe Peter Thiel can go build a seastead and go live out in the ocean where you can have sex with anyone you want to, and um, take as many drugs as you want and whatever. Yeah, I mean, when you hear people who think it's this libertarian germ that's in their mind, and it's like, yeah, if someone builds a seastead, it's just going to be bombed or like taken over by pirates in like 5 minutes. I mean, it's just this really, and again, I myself am a critic of globalism in the form that I've seen it in my lifetime. I think there's some real problems with it. I do think the American public kind of benefits from it to a very large degree, but I think there's a huge problems in like hollowing out the middle class and lack of industry. So I mean, I'm I want to change things. I think the way the world's headed is actually a lot better, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna indulge in fantasy and think that we're all just gonna hold hands. I mean, I guess I am a Hobbesian at heart in this respect. Political decisions come first, and economic decisions are results of political decisions. And libertarians is the reverse, and it's just, yeah, the left in general kind of is based on that false assumption, I think. Also, to add to your original question about the populist right, I mean, I think Trump is fading pretty fast, and the other thing we have to keep in mind. I mean, uh, Marine Le Pen received a major loan. What was it, 10 or 20 million euros from this Russian bank that has since like disappeared or something. It's all very fishy.
Yeah, that was a number of years ago. I think there was this investigation, and some people in France actually got indicted about that.
Yeah.
But I don't really remember that well. But there was this thing like that, yes.
Yeah, and so I mean that obviously is going to go away. I think that I guess this is a bit of a prediction. I'm wondering if the Russia is going to return to the old ways of the Soviet Union, ways that Putin himself knew very well as a KGB operative living in Dresden, and that they're going to start funding. They're going to put aside this kind of mainstream strategy where it's like, we love Trump, we love Brexit, we love Euro, petty nationalism, we love this, all versions of the right, oh, we support the J6 protesters, blah blah blah. My little prediction is that they're going to start funding really extremely toxic and radical shit in the West. The Red Army faction being a paradigmatic in that regard, where you start like you don't fund like a political party, or you don't help out Trump or whatever, but you instead like throw $10,000 to like a terrorist or something, a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak.
Didn't the Atomwaffen division have alleged FSB links? I realize this is kind of out there.
Yes, I've heard this as well. I've actually been talking to someone about this because, in full disclosure, I had certain links, mostly through my ex-wife. I never received funding, and I certainly never received any kind of, the kind of funding that, people who work for RT or anything. I didn't receive a penny, but I certainly didn't receive, hundreds of thousands of dollars or anything. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of Russian interest in people associated with Dugin, and maybe further than that. And we want to promote the alt-right, and the alt-right's anti-NATO, and so on. Now, I never articulated it as such. I actually, in 2015, 2016, I would say things like, Russia's, Trump is diplomatically reaching out to Russia, so we're not going to have this, Cold War division. We're going to kind of respect each other as equals. I've never said we should end NATO, but that obviously that that talking point, needless to say, is curdled milk. But I mean, I was kind of close to a lot of these things, just, speaking personally. And I'm also happy to say that I'm very far away from these things now. I mean, Manuel Oxenreiter, for instance, I genuinely liked him as a person. He was a German. Master Sheikh might know about him. He was a German. He was, a right wing. When I talked to him, he kind of felt like he was associated with the European New Right, Alain de Benoit, Guillaume Fay type thinking. And again, I spoke with him a number of times. We did a dozen podcasts together where we would just be kind of, talk about criticisms of American foreign policy, be generally anti-war, vis-a-vis Iraq, Syria, etc. Well, Manuel Oxenreiter is now dead, and he died. He was my age. I think he was a few years older, and he died he was in a coma and died of a heart attack. That's a little bit surprising for someone in their mid-40s. Not terribly surprising. He was also plausibly accused of creating a false flag operation in Ukraine by basically bombing a Hungarian embassy or a Hungarian cultural center that would result in creating unrest among the Hungarian minority in Ukraine. Now, innocent until proven guilty. He is now deceased, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, a lot of these people who kind of present themselves as like, oh, I'm just your friendly neighborhood anti-war activist, they are deeply connected to Putin. And even, I mean, I was shocked to learn of this. I just learned of this aspect of it a few days ago, but they're deeply connected with basically extremist terrorism in the West or in Ukraine in this instance that is effectively pro-Russia. That's very disturbing.
Yeah, these are the sort of things that have been, at least in the media here, have been talking about these pro-Russian activists actually being funded by Russian entities linked to Moscow, Kremlin, and things like that. But I sort of see this thing rolling back in a way, because Russia, of course, they're spending a lot of money on this war, a lot of money on their military. They might not have enough funding to do something like that. But I mean, they can always find something. But there's been significant moves, at least in Europe or definitely in Eastern Europe, to shut down Russian news outlets like RT, like Sputnik, like blocking websites, blocking television broadcasts that sort of promote the pro-Russian narrative. So they sort of could get their hands tied in this regard and maybe start to do something more radical. But I don't know. I would be very skeptical about it because I think our security services are on top of this and that would be under control.
Well, I'm certainly skeptical about it, but when I look at the situation, I think that might be the future. That because you have these people like Jimmy Dore, for instance, just Caleb Maupin. They all say the same line, and it's always like I mean, these videos when you look back in them now, they're like genuinely hilarious. Like there's this video of Caleb Maupin being, Russia is not going to invade Ukraine. Are you crazy? And then just basically saying NATO's escalating, and we have a regime in Ukraine that is run by Nazis. Well, all of this is
there's
insane.
A lot of gaslighting that goes on, and I would add that when these sort of like institutionalist bureaucratic intelligence types, have throughout the West, throughout America and Europe, have pointed out what are very obvious Russian links to populist, left and right anti-war, sort of people that you've been alluding to. They were, written off as just hysterical, I don't warmonger isn't the right term, but even suggesting that Russian intelligence or Russian money might have links to this was written off as, I guess, neo-McCarthyism or something like that.
Right. It's not going to be written off now. And when all of those people, they're of a similar type as well. They're kind of like room temperature intelligence. They're not really brilliant, and they're recruitable assets in the sense that, like, if you're brilliant and you kind of march by the beat of your own drummer, and you're not a good asset. Like, you might turn on them, but or say something that doesn't fit the party line. But that kind of like Caleb Maupin, like 110 IQ, you can kind of get him to say a line and a way of thinking. And I see all of these people, totally on board with, basically, we're bashing the liberals who are warmongers. NATO is evil. The West is gay. That's another thing. Like, there's nothing to NATO and America and the EU or any Western country outside of, gender pronouns. Sorry, my little dog is aggressively defending his borders at the moment. So you just see this party line, and again, I don't think it's going to work, because I think at this point, like, who could possibly take these people seriously? And so my suggestion is that Russia, in desperation and in sensing that this just isn't working anymore, that they are going to start to engage in more radical stuff. And in that sense, like, funding a terrorist, I mean, you can do a lot. That incident with Manuel Oxenreiter, that, I think he was paying off some guy to engage in terrorism for like €1,500 or something, like, not very much money. And so I'm just suggesting, I think there's a real possibility, we've seen it in the past, that you start saying, oh, let's throw 10 grand to this like crazed group of anarchists and just see what happens. I can kind of see this, as opposed to, we're going to fund like the paleo left, or, some, just some character who goes on live streams and says how the media is lying to you or something. I don't think they're going to do that anymore. I think they might go harder. That's just my sense. All right. Shanky, would you like to speak?
Hi. I was wondering if you would consider Asian democracies to be part of the West.
Well, I mean, I guess you could say that America's had very good relations with Japan. Japan has condemned the Ukraine invasion. But I mean, I just, I think there's certainly some like really strong Western aspects in the sense of just capitalism that you can find in Japan and Korea. But I do think that their, identity matters a great deal, and that an Asian democracy is not really part of the West per se.
Okay. And maybe I was also interested, I guess you would consider Russia to be part of the West if they became a democracy and joined NATO, I guess, right? That's pretty obvious.
Well, it's not necessarily just like you have a parliament and then you're part of the West. I mean, I've said, I mean, I would like the idea of there not being this East-West division, among Europeans, that we just have like a much broader family, and that would include Russia. But I don't, I simply have to bow to reality. I mean, I do not think anything like that is possible, and it is increasingly impossible. But I don't have any like, I don't think that the Russian people are, just like a different race or just radically different culture. The thing is, I think Putin might very well think that, though. So, my like pan-Europeanism, it's unrequited by Russian leadership, and in that sense, it's not really operative.
I think Russia could, at the soonest, become sort of westward leaning, maybe in 50 to 100 years. Definitely no sooner, because they never been in this situation of like rule of law, this what we call democracy, like transparent institutions and things like that. They've never had that any time in their history. So if after Putin something starts, they're basically starting from zero, and it takes time to build up these sorts of institutions and this form of government that people in the West have been used to for more than 100 years now.
Yeah. Okay. Nick, is it Nikopol?
Yeah. Hey, Richard. I just because you were talking about the, I mean, there are always rumors about various, I wouldn't say spies, but cooperators with the Russian embassies and so on. So I thought you'd be interested. In a couple of days ago in Slovakia, what happened? Police actually arrested 3 people who they charged with espionage for the Russian embassy. One of them who admitted, like, one of them was a colonel for the, well, ex-colonel in the army. One of them was an ex-officer in the Secret Service. The third one is interesting because he had nothing to do with the Secret Service or with the army. He was writing for one pro-Russian news website, call it how you want. And they actually, well, I don't know if it didn't leak. They released it. They just went through the journalist. They released the, how would you say it? A recording when he met with one of the operatives from the embassy and that entire dialogue they had together. Like, the guy was actually tasked by the GRU, which is Russian Military Secret Service, to find people who would be willing to cooperate, who would be willing to go further, and so on. And this is the fun thing. They paid him €500 a month.
Exactly.
They actually agreed on that. So it's not like massive money. It's not millionaires. You don't need to find, like, okay, those colonels in the army or in Secret Service, I'm sure they get much more money, because these are actually people who have access to top secret materials. And already special prosecutor, he came forward and said that they were actually collecting information from the NATO about the Ukraine, about the military secrets and so on. So basically, what would you expect from the Secret Service? But this third guy, he was he was a propagandist. That was his job, and his job was to find more propagandists who would be doing this. And you can see
you're breaking up there.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is not the best.
No, your audio is good. I think the problem is on Richard's end, actually, because I've been having some problems with you, Richard. I actually asked some people in DMs, and my audio
is it breaking
good.
up for you too, Master Shake?
It's sometimes it breaks up. Yeah.
Is it Master Shake? Is it breaking up for you too?
Sometimes, yeah, but not now.
Okay.
I mean, you're breaking up as well a bit, but nothing really that terribly.
I can hear you fine, Nikopol.
All right. Okay.
Oh,
so just
okay.
That was just my quick point to that discussion. Like, okay, ignoring like actual espionage in military or military industrial sector or government officials, these high things, which I'm sure are beyond our level of comprehension what actually is going on there. But in these kind of a small thing, these, maybe you can call them useful idiots and so on, they do that. And you can see they generally they like to find someone who is not super bright, but can get the job done, is in these circles, can identify the people who would be willing to do it, well, maybe not a full time, but do it per their instructions, and they pay them little. This is not an expensive operation. So, I mean, that's once confirmed. I mean, I heard rumors about this for years and years, but, rumor is one thing. You don't know. It can be true. It doesn't have to be, but this one is on record. So just that. It doesn't have to be like Natasha, the spy, who is paying 10 million to someone who is blogging.
Right. I wish that were the case.
Who wouldn't?
Natasha comes in a black leather leotard and pressures you into engage in global espionage. Who could refuse such an offer? Okay, Crocodile. That was a great anecdote. A great insight. I appreciate it. Crocodile Street. You were up next.
Yeah. So the question I kind of have is, what does Western democracy really mean to the people of Eastern Europe? Because I feel like they found out the hard way what that meant in the 90s when the Soviet Union fell, and as bad as the conditions were under the Soviet Union, it would never compare to how horrible it was when in that so-called end of history, as Francis Fukuyama called it, when Eastern Europe just became this complete like Sodom and Gomorrah in that sense, where that's where all these Eastern Bloc countries became one of the biggest hubs for human trafficking, child pornography. Even Crocodile.
Where are you getting this from?
Where am I getting this from?
Yeah.
From family who lived during that time.
Well, I lived here for all my life, and actually, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about on these spaces. Is that I think many people in the West, they have this sort of notion about the 90s in Russia or in Eastern Europe about being worse than the Great Depression or something like Weimar Germany after 1928, 29, something like that. But it wasn't. It was never the case. I never felt it. Maybe I'm a bit more sort of protected in that sense. I was, but if you talk with the people here, they would definitely answer you that yes, well, in the 90s was like this transition period, but it was much better than what you had in the Soviet Union.
In what sense?
You couldn't buy, you couldn't even get toilet paper in the Soviet Union.
If I may interject, I also grew up in
Finish your point, please.
I just also grew up in that era in Slovakia. And from the Central European state, Slovakia probably had it worse. There was a massive rise of mafia. I was not even 10, and I knew how the guy who was in charge of mafia of my district.
Yeah, the biggest problem in the 90s was this lack of rule of law, like criminality and crime, like not having strong institutions like the police and things like that. That was the problem. Yes, but there was no famine, no like explicit degeneracy, like people like prostituting themselves on the streets, this like on every corner. That wasn't absolutely the case.
Yeah, but it also,
where are you getting this from?
It was also a natural byproduct of what happened. The Eastern market simply broke up. That's just what happened. And so the kind of a social policies which were under communism, the bedrock of it, employment for everyone, the apartment for it was not sustainable. It was all running on debt at that point. When the communism broke up, it was running on debt for over 10 years at least. So that was a consequence of basically what brought down communism. Communism didn't just came up one day and okay, I'm done. It was a prolonged recession which lasted somewhere around from 70s all the way to 89 to 91, and then everything broke down. And it had to be rebuilt from scratch. And of course, in that time, opportunists, mafia members, oligarchs, all of these people rose up. But I wouldn't say it had a lot to do with the so-called Western democracy. Slovakia really wasn't that much democratic in the 90s. We were quite, we nearly became basically next Belarus. The prime minister we had, he was an autocrat. Like he went so far, he abducted the son of his president because he didn't want to sign his decrees. His secret service did it in cooperation with the mafia. So stuff like that was happening. It was a mafia state. And then and we got it worse than Poles. We got it worse than Czechs. We got it worse than Hungarians in many cases because the situation in this case deteriorated to the point that the autocrat was governing. And the only lucky kind of a break was that he was so arrogant that he believed that people love him and he allowed next election to be free. and he lost big time. So I don't know if that's with the Western or not Western. I mean, in Russia also, you had rigged election. Boris Yeltsin didn't win the second election. Everyone knows that Zyuganov, the leader of the Communist Party, won it, and he rigged the elections.
It was a
So
World
you see
Economic
basically
Forum.
economical consequences of that.
It was that Davos Pact that specifically was assembled to get rid of. I can't remember his name. Another kind of communist holdout, but they pretty much conspired. I mean, out in the open to rig these elections. So this idea of, or I get say, let me say in a broader sense, every time America, the West, or whatever tries to go to a country and liberate it, only thing that happens is we completely destroy anything that's there, and of course we use the already unstable government as a pretense of us being able to go in there and make it even worse. Because no matter how bad things are, things can always get worse. I think Afghanistan is another good example of that, where the Taliban, not good guys, not a good place to live, and then we come in there, and what do we create? We create this entirely sectarian civil war. We have this, Bakabazi, that kind of dancing boy pederasty. That's this very institutionalized, ritualized form of, child prostitution and stuff. So it seems like, and then Libya is another example of that
we
too.
created that. I mean, I just
We
look.
we foster it. I mean, America doesn't create anything, or the West doesn't create anything. We just go in places, make everything worse, and we fund the worst people in any culture. The West, everything the West does is highlight that stuff, and I think Ukraine is a good example of that too. Where after after like 6 years of the Western media calling everybody, including yourself, a Nazi, spinning themselves in knots, calling everybody Nazi. Now we're funding actual self-proclaimed Nazis, the Azov Battalion, and now they're saying, well, it's a little bit different. It's different this time. So it's like it's completely post-ideological. We go the West. The reason why people hate the West is because we go in there and we fuck everything up.
Well, you're
Well, I'm
just
just
massively black pill on. I understand it in some way, but like you've created this Manichaean world. I mean, I don't support the invasion. I did not support the invasion of Iraq. I supported the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I am a realist in many ways, but like this depiction of the West as like creating nothingness and inherently evil or something, it doesn't like hold. I mean, I agree. I think we're all kind of suffering from certain form of nihilism and across the white race in the world, but like it doesn't hold up to just basic facts. I mean, whatever problems, serious problems there are in Russia in the 90s, I mean, there that humanitarian catastrophe in many ways. Whatever problems there are, the people vote effectively with their feet that they want to have a more Western society. I mean, Ukraine is fighting and dying so as not to be under Russian rule. And I think in your mind, it's like the West is so evil and Manichaean, whatever. It's so evil that like communism can't be that bad, and it's better and offers stability and so on. Well, Ukrainians just radically disagree with you. I mean, when the Berlin Wall was opened effectively almost as a kind of mistake or a fluke. I think a East German bureaucrat said something like, "Well, we won't stop you," or he said some minor thing like that, and people wanted to reunify, and they wanted to be part of West Germany. It wasn't ever the idea that like Western Germany would become the Eastern Bloc was just unthinkable. And so like yeah, there are things that are kind of worse, and just because there's poverty under communism or Eastern European autocracy doesn't mean that they're more traditionalist or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hear a lot of this stuff, and I myself am kind of someone who will kind of engage in this and like talk about there's a certain nihilism at the heart of the West, probably emanating from the death of God and so on. I mean, I kind of understand this, but you you overstate the case and you become this like Manichaean like theologist, basically, where it's like anything that's created in the West is just evil and we just go and destroy everything and whatever. That's just not true. And like I think the crisis, the more general crisis of nihilism, you see occurring in Eastern Europe at the same rate, if not worse. And so just to like blame everything on the West or America in particular, I just this just seems to be a kind of online opinion that someone has that doesn't really jive with reality.
Well, no, I mean, I think it definitely does, because the question is, what is so? If you notice, every time any kind of like article about this invasion, they keep saying Russia invaded a sovereign country. So my question is, what is sovereignty and who defines it? And why does America or the West have the authority to determine what is and isn't sovereign?
There was a referendum in the 90s in which 80 to 90% of Ukrainians voted to become an independent country. I mean, I don't know what you want. I mean, so what is sovereignty? It's a territory that's defended by military. I mean, you can define it in a lot of different ways, but you know it when you see it.
I think.
I mean, are the Ukrainians fighting against Americans, saying, "Get those weapons out of here. We desperately want to be Russians"? Is that what's happening right now?
It's hard to say. I can't really speak for just that.
That's absurd. You're being absurd, then. You're
I'm
just
being
simply
absurd?
ignoring reality.
I think that the greater issue is it's a push towards, and I know you yourself are not a big fan of Dugin, but I think this kind of we need a more multipolar world order where Russia isn't beholden to these sanctions, to an ever shifting definition of what sovereignty is. So I think the idea that Russia I guess I've been hearing about a lot of these kind of BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa are kind of, they're not really speaking too much on this whole thing because they have their own kind of economic coalition. So I think overall, trying to create a new multipolar world order is the best way to go forward.
Well, I agree that a multipolar world order is where we are headed, as I've said. But like, what my problem with a lot of Duginism and like fourth political theory is that it promotes a multipolar world as some kind of like form of liberalism or something, where it's like it's liberalism on the basis of the nation state. So whereas the individual is the subject of history according to liberals, like now we have these like sovereign entities, and it's more moral and just for like there no one to be in charge or whatever. This is just hogwash. I mean, this is moral platitudes coming from someone and it's probably based on just pure resentment. If the BRICS countries wants to challenge America, good luck. Go do it. You're going to have to do it by being powerful.
And also,
you can't do it just by like moralizing to us. Like, it's so unfair. I mean,
also the BRICS countries, they're not a thing anymore. I mean, it was maybe 15 years ago, but now it's not happening. It's no longer a thing. I mean, Brazil, they have a right-wing government. 15 years ago, they had a left-wing government. When this BRICS thing was sort of pushed in the media and in so-called alternative media channels like RT and things like that, Bolsonaro is completely on board with the West. I think so is India in a way, because India is not really friendly with China. They have had military skirmishes before, and they're sort of on the fence right now, whether to buy Russian oil or armaments to oppose China or not. So it's really much more complicated than that. You can't say that, well, the BRICS countries is going to show it to the West or something like that. It's absolutely not the case. There is no unity between them.
Well, no, but right now, I mean, I think China has the ultimate leverage over the entire world, so they can kind of they can really play this game to their advantage, mostly because, you know, in that kind of like Dengist, way, they really have, you know, because they play the long game, they've consolidated the means of production for pretty much the entire world. So they really have, you know, they have the ultimate leverage here that the West is you know, losing more and more because they sold out to all the sweatshops and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I can't.
I don't disagree with that statement. I mean, I think it's a really serious issue, and Chimerica benefited the West and benefited average Americans even to a degree. But I actually I basically agree with what you just said. But like, it's a matter of power, and if China has all this leverage, like, why aren't they endorsing the invasion and telling people not to sanction Russia?
Well, because they don't have to, because they're above it, because they don't. So I guess, like, you know, moral argument aside, I know we disagree on that, but I think that what is, I guess I'm just trying to say, like, I don't even really know what I'm trying to say at this point, but I just think that I know we disagree on the moral implications of all this stuff too. But I think I don't know. I think going forward, this multipolar thing is going to go forward. But I think I've talked too much, so I'll let someone else talk.
All right, good. You invited a bit of a heated exchange, and that's always good. Okay, I'll just keep going down the list here. Jackno.
Hello.
Hi.
He called on Jackno.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm still figuring this thing out.
No worries.
Go ahead.
No worries, man. No worries. So yeah, you know, I've heard a lot of talk about, like, you know, the moral, you know, whether or not, you know, the U.S. or in the West in general has a moral basis to be getting involved in these sorts of conflicts. But I guess I would just like to ask, you know, both Richard and Master, you know, what is it exactly that the U.S. seeks to get out of being involved in this affair? And, you know, Richard, I heard you on a space the other day talking about how, I think you mentioned something to the effect of, you know, yeah, if we could go back in time and kind of manage to be a little more inviting to Russia, that would have been the right play to try and kind of, you know, mollify some of Russia's concerns and get them accepted as a member of the overall kind of Western coalition.
Yeah.
But as an American, like, what benefit is there to America? And I'm separate from the West. I'm speaking specifically of America. Like, as an American, why does it behoove us to be spending, you know, blood and treasure? I suppose in this case, more treasure than blood. But what do we seek to gain out of this? Because, you know, it is kind of concerning. You see India talking about buying oil and you know, avoiding the petrodollar to buy oil. You see, you know, the governments of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates not picking up the leader of the global hegemon's phone calls. And it does seem like, you know, America and the West in general cannot be involved every time a country does something that we feel is morally, you know, kind of reprehensible. So I would just say, like, you know, from a very utilitarian perspective, what's the argument for how does it serve America's interest to be?
Well, I mean, the petrodollar is fundamentally based on the notion that America is a sphere of influence. And if you just want to retreat from that, then people are going to really quickly retreat from the petrodollar. It wouldn't make sense anymore. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, for better and for worse, America isn't this, like, big frontier where we can just, you know, buy our own industry, trade with no one, and just be peaceful. And, you know, as attractive as that might be, and I'll admit it's very attractive, the train has left the station on that. And it left it in the First World War to a degree, and certainly by 1944, it had completely left the station on that. And so like we live in an imperial country, and that just is what it is. I mean, there is a lot of just obvious strategic interests. There's like cultural connections that we have with Europe that I hope to maintain. And but beyond that, I mean, heartland Europe with its strategic resources is just obviously hugely important. And Ukraine, particularly in terms of wheat, but I mean, it is a massive strategic interest to Americans. And I think a paleo's, I mean, if you're living, they live in the should and not the is. And it's like they live in a kind of like, well, couldn't we just be a continent all to our own? And in reality, the answer to that is no. And the Western coalition is going to change. Like, I think Europe is in a very different position. Europe is not a defeated power at this point. Now, you could say Europe, they're a luxurious and decadent power. They don't spend enough on defense. Fair enough. But they are in a much different position than they were in 1945. And so this Western alliance is going to be different, and it's going to be more European. I think that's a great thing. But like, we have to live in this world. Like, we have a sphere of influence. You don't just give stuff like that up.
Hello? Yeah, I agree. But I think it's also a question of, I think the conversation is being framed in a way by these paleocons, by these non-interventionists, that, well, America came to Eastern Europe, or it came to Ukraine, and why did they go there? But I don't think that. America spent a lot of time after the Second World War building this system, being this so-called beacon of democracy and freedom, and you're sort of creating this image to strive towards. And then these countries want to be a part of this global system. Then you're just going to say no. You're just going to sort of put your prestige on the line and refuse these things. I mean, I don't think that the United States would do that, and I don't think that they should, because they would obviously lose their prestige, lose their interests, and become a force that wouldn't be for the good in the world. So that's my thoughts on this.
All right. Salt. I'll do Salt, and then I'll do History Speaks.
Yeah, so Putin made a speech yesterday, and it was actually very interesting from an ethnogenesis kind of perspective, where he was talking about the Slavic character and how the West is trying to put pressure on Russians that have houses in Miami or on the French Riviera, how their society will naturally spit these people out, this fifth column out, if in the same way that if a fly spits in your mouth, you go poo, and you don't even think about it, you just spit it right out. Now, Russia's always been ruled by a foreign class, whether it be the Swedish Vikings that kind of formed, came down the Dnieper River and formed the Kievan Rus, and kind of like were the upper class of the Slavs. It was famously later German and French aristocrats at different time of the Tsardom. They inherited their religion from Byzantium. Then under the Bolsheviks, for the initial period, it was largely Jews, and then under Stalin, it was a Georgian. I was wondering if you had any thoughts to the Slavic character, and if there is kind of any validity to this notion that authoritarianism and kind of I don't quite know how to put it without sounding insulting, but
it's
almost
natural.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously a lot of truth to that. And I mean, do you think that Putin is offering the chance of like the Slavs are going to rule now? Do you think that's what he was saying?
I think he was saying that this is kind of a return to almost a become who you are type of thing.
Yeah.
Where our society isn't naturally like. He also said in the speech, I don't know if you saw it, that the West, like you like these people with their houses in Miami or these internal Western leaners within Russia may, see themselves as something, like applicable to the system, that but they're just being used to destroy Russia from the inside. And that and this was a very interesting line, because of their Slavic mentality, that even if they sell out Russia, all they're doing is achieving the lowest ring in this power structure, and they're disposed of once they're used. So I'm wondering.
Well, he said slavish mentality. I don't think. I mean, isn't he making a distinction between like the eternal Anglo within Russia and Slavs as like the national base? Isn't that the distinction he's making?
I think he's making the distinction between basically civilizational thought. Famously, Russia defines itself, in, unfortunately, moments where it draws the line between the West and it, like Teutoburg Forest, where the Teutonic Knights came galloping in, and then, Alexander Nevsky, beats them at the Battle of the Ice, stuff like that, crushing the Swedes at Poltava,
Yeah.
So
I agree. Like that East-West divide just cannot. It's very difficult for it to be overcome, because like they don't want to overcome it. Like someone like me who just sits in his armchair and says, well, we should have a just united Euro alliance that, goes all the way through Siberia and includes Portugal and North America. I mean, we're just kind of speculating on this stuff, and Russians do not think that way. And they refuse to think that way. And so my kind of stuff is just mere speculation, and theirs is reality. And Putin now, because keep in mind, Putin offered the West for people living in St. Petersburg and Moscow, or a decadent, luxurious version of the West for those people. And then he offered like stability in the rural areas. And I think now he's almost like taking away the West. I mean, the West is taking it away themselves, but he's basically saying, you're not going to have your Gucci handbags and whatever in Moscow, and you're either on Team Russia or you're off, and we're going to spit you out like flies. So he's offering some like renewed Russian nation.
I think it's also should be noted that Putin's daughters, they live in the West, and children of other Putin's in the Putin's circle, they live and study in the West. And I don't know, maybe the situation has changed now, but up until recently, that was certainly the case. So, was he meaning? What did he also meant? His children and the children of his associates when he talked about these evil Russians who live in the West?
Well, that's kind of common for Russian history, right? I mean, famously, Peter the Great was sent abroad to, I think it was the Netherlands, to learn shipbuilding, and did his tour of Europe to bring things back to Russia to kind of be what do you say, syncretic? To synchronize it with the Russian kind of like Bulgar state.
Mm-hmm. So what you're suggesting is that Putin is still a kind of foreign leader, but he's basically saying that you Slavs are going to get in line.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. There's always kind of been a weird ethnic, not so much, I guess ethnic in a way, but also kind of a weird separatism between the upper class and the lower classes of the Russian imperial project.
Yeah.
I would just add, Richard was right. He said slaves. He didn't say Slavs. So that's there's quite different words in Russian for that. It sounds similar in English, so that's maybe why you made a mistake.
Yeah. All very interesting. I mean, I would say that aristocratic classes, across the European world did view themselves to at least some degree as a kind of different race. So maybe it was a matter of being, much more pronounced. And obviously before the First World War, famously or infamously, we had an aristocratic family effectively ruling Europe that went to war with one another in a devastating fashion.
Richard, do you remember some time ago you talked about this eugenic argument about upward and downward mobility, that, well, you rather have a doctor whose ancestors were also doctors, not peasants or something like that?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah, this is actually a point I've been thinking about making it for a while now. There's this map. If you do a Google search, literacy rate in the Russian Empire, one of the first images that comes up is this map of the European part of Russia. It looks like an old scan of an old book from the 1897 census in the Russian Empire. And it shows literacy rates across the western part of the Russian Empire. And of course, Finland and the Baltics, they have 75+% literacy rate, while the Russian, like the heartland or whatever, has like less than 30% literacy rate. But only about St. Petersburg and Moscow have like high literacy rate there. We can assume that that most of the aristocratic class in Russia, in the Russian Empire at the time, were wiped out during and after the Bolshevik Revolution. So the people who are in charge in Russia now, who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they have like one or two generations between them and illiterate peasants. So maybe we can also think about it in this way: these differences between West and Russia, and why their policies are like they are, and why the decision making is like it is now. Unlike, well, maybe some more sophisticated things, they choose military action and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, just to fill out that argument, I mean, it's an argument that I hear from Ed Dudden. I've made it. I hear it from, it's a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls by Clark. Um, excuse me, Farewell to Alms. Excuse me, not For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's another Hemingway reference. Farewell to Alms, and the sun also rises. Basically, what he's saying is that the upper classes were outbreeding the lower classes at a very high rate, and in effect replacing them. And so, if you were, in the middle, like if you're in a professional class or if you're an aristocrat, a landowner, you were having 3 kids, whereas a peasant might have 1. And so there's just a general replacement. And, fertility is associated with intelligence. That's a good thing. Now, today, that has been totally reversed. But I think what Master Sheikh is saying, and I hadn't really thought about this in terms of Russia, but it's a very important thought, is that
I DM'd you the map so you can look at it.
I will definitely look at it. Is that with the bullshit at the beginning, the Bolshevik Revolution is so violent, and then there's a subsequent civil war in which the whites lost. Whites, not race there, but they lost, and so you do have these. It was itself a kind of ethnogenesis of sorts, or at least a kind of sorting out of the population. And so you are showing preference to this very large peasant class in Russia. I mean, I saw someone was doing a very provocative thread on Twitter the other day about how, like, chattel slavery of African Americans can be compared to Russian serfdom. Now, that seems provocative, but he actually made a lot of good points in that regard. So it would be almost like if there were a Bolshevik revolution in the United States and then all of the African Americans were put in charge. And, we had something like that actually in Reconstruction to a degree, where they were filling up state houses and things like that as a kind of revenge that the Yankees did against the Southerners. That was ended not too long afterward. But, these things are selective. And is there, are we selecting out and kind of rewarding the peasant type class who has just a very different mentality to the West. So there really is a kind of, maybe not a race difference, but a kind of class difference. Because remember, there is a genetics to class to a large degree. There are different types of people in this world. And I don't mean this to be in any way insulting to Russians, but I mean, for instance, my ex-wife had a very typical story of Russian expats. Her mother is half Georgian, her father is Russian, and they were both PhDs. They were both chemistry professors, so very highly educated, living in Moscow. They left in the mid 90s and they became professors in Canada. That's a very typical story. Well, that is a selection event. You had people who obviously have high IQs and are civilized leaving a country and going to Canada. And there are consequences to that. And from at least my perspective, not good ones. But I, of course, don't think SALT is being very careful about this as well. We're not here to insult Russians or claim that they're peasants or whatever. It's just there's a reality to this that just has to be taken into effect or taken into consideration.
Yeah, we're definitely not Madison Grant Post in here.
That's true. The Nordicist. Okay. So history speaks. You can talk.
Hey, Richard. Okay, full disclosure first, so no one thinks I'm being subversive with my questioning. I'm liberal. I despise white nationalism and so forth. But I find you a compelling figure because you seem to be intelligent and well-read, and most people with this point of view are not that. I'm sorry, but they're certainly not. And my question for you is, have you come, I guess relatedly to that premise, have you come to question through the last few years of your experiences white nationalism at even, let's leave aside like a logic or philosophy, like at a temperamental level? And
yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
Really quick, here's what I mean by that. I mean, you get so many people who just have, yeah, you have. Good. Okay. I mean, yeah, I guess my work here is done then, right?
Okay,
I mean,
good.
it just
Sorry,
seems to
you
me
were breaking up a little bit there. And maybe you could repeat yourself because that you're
you temperamentally
up.
are not suited.
Okay, let me speak here. Is this breaking up for everyone else? It might be on my end where my Wi-Fi is touch and go.
I can hear you now, Richard. I can hear you
can
well.
hear me now. Okay, I think it's my end. I think my Wi-Fi is in and out. From what I heard from History Speaks is that, have you questioned like the temperamental aspects of?
Well, how can you? Can you hear me now, Richard? I just don't understand how somebody like you, who obviously has an elitist streak, has read books and so forth, how can you essentially identify with at some sense, egalitarian ideology, where you're broadly identifying with white people, which includes Baked, right? I mean, he's part of with whites as such, and you can't. I feel like you try to romanticize it to obscure this conflict you have, which is you don't in your bones. This is my impression. You tell me if I'm incorrect.
Yeah.
You don't in your bones deep affinity with
I think your
like stupid vulgar people. Yeah, but yet white nationalism involves
it's absolutely
that. So,
correct. It doesn't necessarily have to. I mean, I've always been concerned with civilizational issues and so on, and I've always kind of been rubbed the wrong way by the kind of southern fried down home white nationalism where it is just based in bigotry. Now keep in mind, most of that stuff that I'm describing is part of the southern strategy, and an aspect of Republican voters, but I've also rubbed them the wrong way. So I mean, I would say most white nationalists kind of hate me, but I do. I mean, I saw a lot of promise in Trump as this kind of wrecking ball or anarchic force where it's like anything is possible after this. He's smashing into the party, crashing the party, and then other people can kind of get in. And I saw it as an opportunity in that sense. But I mean, I've said explicitly, like I do think that the populist aspect of Trumpism kind of brought out the worst in me, and it's not really who I am. So I'm sure that I do have opinions that you find, unpalatable and so on. But I would say very strongly, like, I support European unification. I support the West as a civilization, and I want us to be better. I do have however a euphemistic or eugenic streak you can say. I mean, I want civilization to advance, and I think in some ways the populism, when it's just purely negative, when it's an emotional lashing out, is really counterproductive of all of these things.
Yeah, I just think, Richard, you're going to have to, and I'm someone who's, just because I'm in the politically provoked sphere, and I endured your debate with Zen Shapiro, and I was actually very sympathetic to your feelings. I won't go any further than that because I'm friendly with a friend of this guy. I won't go any further than that. But I think you're going to have to confront at one point the fact that you are, and I'm complimenting you, but I'm also criticizing you. You are capable of getting beyond Nazi LARPing, of seeing the problems in that, right? And these other people are not, for example.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to confront, I think, also the populism intrinsic in this, because ultimately you can say abstractly it need not be this way, but the fact is the white nationalist movement is a disaster. I mean, if the behavior that these people have engaged in, the fraud, or David Duke taking the donations to blackjack table, Eli Mosley, like trans veteran, like pretending to be a veteran or whatever, or I guess combat veteran, and then like Mike Enoch concealing his Jewish wife and bringing her on to do a Nazi poem. I mean, if like the ADL had engaged in a fraction of this level of personal fraud, it would be like eternal memes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you can say it's just personal attacks, but like when it's this systematic, and the stupidity is also systematic, kind of the simple-mindedness, I think it does speak to the ideas. This is something you'll have to confront, that you, as someone who is not stupid and is well-read, were in such a movement. So, and played a leading role in it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that most of these people, either don't talk to me or openly despise me. I don't want to just renounce this case, but I mean, I have basically, I'm off the Trump train, to say the least, and I've rejected it. So it is, I don't know. I mean, at the same time, I mean, I am a radical thinker who is going to be provocative. So I'm not going to be like, oh, hey guys, I'm a liberal now, and blah blah blah. But yeah, I agree. It's been, it's a kind of a devil's bargain where you can become famous and so on, but then it takes so much of you. And these people that I'm surrounded with were just uniformly bad people, and they don't have my best interest at heart. They might see me as infamous and they want to ride that a little bit, but they are just, I mean, what you describe is a very real thing. Now, I'm far from perfect, so I'm not going to claim that I'm some paragon of
no.
virtue.
I'm not saying you're some great guy. I don't know you. I don't know if you're a great guy or a horrible guy, but you're not. Two things. You're not stupid. Most of them are stupid. Some aren't, but virtually all of them are incapable of emotionally getting beyond being against the current thing. One, and two, like this kind of weird Nazi LARPing.
Yeah.
Where like they project. It's like the heroic cast.
Yeah, look at this. I mean, like, there are these videos going around of Nick Fuentes where he is saying, Tsar Putin and our boys in red, white, and blue, he's referring to the Russian flag, are, liberating Ukraine from the liberals, or he's going over the top. and it's, you know, he has a smile on his face, so there's irony to it, but I think he means it. But when you do, I mean, it's one thing to be sympathetic towards Russia. It's another thing to do something that just absolutely outlandish, where you can't take that back. Like, that's not a joke.
Mhm.
And, you know, even if he kind of thinks it is, and you just look at that, and it's like, so you are alienating yourself from all of society by doing this.
Which is
And
strange because his whole thing, and actually he's been relatively effective at it, is like, even though whatever his private sympathies are, getting rid of the Nazi LARPing element,
right,
just about open white nationalism. But yeah, he seems to be throwing it away for this, because I mean, ultimately you can't despise your country and ask to be given a position of power in it. That just is contradictory, you know. And
right.
if you look at, yeah,
And they're not even consistent on despising their country. So, like, when Trump is running for office, it's about flag waving, and he's taking over, and he's the best, and America won't do this. And then Trump loses office, and it's like, America's inherently evil, and, you know, we're gonna be traitors. Effectively, we're gonna side with a geopolitical enemy, and, you know, because they're gonna kill the feminist or some crazy notion
yeah.
like that. And it's just, yeah, it's a very strange thing. I have noticed, though, you scratch a mainstream populist, and you find a nihilist, and kind of the reverse as well. It's that it's a weird combination, and I think, and again, I don't want to do this where I'm just like bashing Nick Fuentes or something, but I'm just using him as kind of like a symbol or as an important figure. Like, there's an there's an element to him where it's kind of like two sides of the same coin, where it's like, I'm just a Republican guy, why are you? I'm not a white nationalist, I'm whatever. And then you flip over to, we're going to invade the Capitol, or we support Russia, and it's like there's no in between, there's no mediation or like sense that something can be transformed, at least potentially. It's just like this crazed pragmatism on the one hand, or like crazed nihilism on the other. It's just very odd personality.
Yeah.
But I
As
think
a
he's very
boring
widespread.
as a boring liberal, I kind of see all of these things, including the woke left, certainly, as expressions of, and I think you made this point, but I don't think you've tied it to the, maybe you have actually, but I see kind of the far right, populist right, and the woke left as kind of expressions of decadence. Like, we have, if you're like relatively smart, like living in the United States, circa 10 years ago, let's say, and even today as well, but let's go 10 years ago to illustrate the point, was very good. You just loads of opportunities. You can do all sorts of interesting things, or living
Hmm.
in Britain or France or Germany or whatever. So, I think we had to pathologize each other in these ways, and it's created a number of toxic dynamics. And also, there's a lack of realism to them. Like, the way they depict the West is not a realistic, hard-hitting criticism of the West. Just as it isn't realistic, for that matter, hard-hitting criticism of Russia to portray it as Nazi Germany. It is not, despite the
Right.
the horrible things that are happening in the war.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. Let me let in some more people here. Lightning Patriot, you haven't spoken yet. Um, so would you like to go? And then I'll go to the Futurist next.
Me?
Yes,
Okay.
Lightning Patriot.
Okay.
You're up.
I remember, I think it was the last space, like a night or two ago. You did kind of, say with, some people who, made their decisions in this country, and they're, suffering the consequences. And just sort of like some of the positions some people in the dissident sphere have, where they're just sort of like, the United States is, I mean, I've done this comparison quite a lot, but there's something a little off of saying that, like, we are exactly in the Soviet Union, and like we're literally being treated like, the KGB would have treated people. It goes a little, it rubs a little off, if you get what I mean. I mean, people used to
Yeah.
kind of say, it's sort of like that, but it's a lot softer. Was kind of the more. I remember that from like 2016, 2017. You know, people would say like, yeah, I mean, the Soviet Union was a lot more brutal, but what we have is a softer kind of tyranny, or whatever they would say. I mean, would you say that there's still like some degree of kind of uh, like we don't exactly have free speech in this country, if you get what I mean? Like it's not exactly.
Well,
We do have.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get fired from your job. There certainly is like surveillance of you. I mean, if you start putting out really radical right or left wing positions, you might very well be talked to by the FBI. I mean, there is a degree of like surveillance or something. I don't think it's anything like the Stasi in East Germany or
Yeah.
something, but it is real. And I think there's also like, we talk about free speech, but I mean, like, we're human beings, and at the end of the day, we're like a pack animal. And you in no society was there ever some like pure marketplace of ideas where you could just say everyone had a new
Yeah.
opinion on anything. I mean, there is a very strong human instinct to conform and to be religious and so on, and we just have to recognize that. I mean, that's a very real thing. Now, of course, I wish that I didn't face the deplatforming that I did in 2017, which is and I
Horrible.
got banned from YouTube
Yeah.
and things. Yeah, it's horrible. It's unfair. And I think you could also make an argument that like you deplatform me and you are in some ways like helping out the alt-right or whatever, like allowing them to be deplatformed, but you're also kind of like helping out people who are violent.
Yeah.
And they kind of see, oh, there's no future, we just have to blow things up right now. I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, and I think
Yeah.
it's clearly unfair, but it's not anything
It
like
also allows
what you had in other countries.
It also allows more crazier people to take the reins, or maybe even be kind of propped up to take the reins, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just crappier people, like,
Yeah.
it's the alt-right really had its day by being loyal to Trump and by saying, oh, we're not Richard Spencer or whatever. And that was strategically effective for them for a time. The alt-right also led to Stop the Steal on January 6th. So I mean, it's kind of a weird situation. I look back at it, I see a lot of irony in it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay. I think I said I'll do the futurist next, and then I'll move to Mittal.
Hello.
The futurist. Yes.
Hello, Richard.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I wanted to ask what you made of the argument that Russia is a kind of younger civilization. And so while they may lose this battle, a great deal of history could be sort of Russian-esque, and Russia could absorb a lot of Europe, a kind of new Russia.
I'll let Master Sheikh take that. I mean, I don't agree, but Master Sheikh might have a stronger take on that.
Well, I don't absolutely think that Russia is like a new civilization. They certainly been around for a while, but it's more of a despotic type of civilization at best. But when you say that, well, Russia would absorb Europe or other territories,
but not
would
exactly.
ask you a counter question. How long would you think that would last? I mean, the 100 years.
I have
10
no
years?
idea. That's actually a very good question. I guess I just think that within history there are all kinds of bunch of factors. So you could have no idea how it could last. My instinct is that it would be very short, and it seems kind of far-fetched. It's been on my mind because I've been reading that supposedly Russia has this spiritual aspect to it that the West, at least at this point in time, doesn't really. But I think you guys have been kind of arguing against that.
Well, the spiritual aspect, the Russian Orthodoxy, it's you have to take it into account that it's this image that Russia has created of itself through various media outlets like RT or what have you. It's tailor made to appeal to people who have like some grievances or disagreements, or they don't like the West in general, and so they sort of offer this trad alternative.
So I kind of
the Orthodox Church during the Soviet times, it was very closely linked with the FSB. All the pastors, the church ministers there, they were in fact KGB informants, and nothing really has
presented the argument. And I was just interested by the possibility of it. I also know a guy who's telling me that,
he kind of broke up.
The what guy is telling you?
Pro-Russia views all the time. So I just wanted to get some further clarification from you guys.
Well, I didn't hear you. You said something about the guy, and then you broke off. Can you please repeat your point?
Oh, no, I just know a guy in my surroundings. He's kind of my friend. He talks about how Russia is going to install pro-Slavic fascism in basically every country in Europe and in America, because every other country is on the brink of collapse, according to him. But that's
well, I think your friend is delusional.
Yeah, he's going a bit far.
But the question is, well, people say, well, you said that, well, Russia could expand. Well, for how long would it last? How long would it last? Well,
no. That's a fine question. I hadn't really thought about it. It's just kind of a conceptual, like it's kind of a vision, if you see what I mean, in the sense that Richard has this vision of a white ethno-state that could be 200 years from now. So it is abstract, but it emotionally gives something people to work for, if you see what I mean.
Right.
I mean, in the current form, like Putinism and this Russian traditionalism or whatever, I don't see it has any future, actually. Maybe until Putin is in power, we'll see what happens afterwards. But I'm very skeptical of them building some sort of an empire or something like that. If they do, it's going to be just based on force, on military power, and those sort of things don't last. I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed. You could argue that maybe Russia is collapsing, but I don't know. I certainly think that it wouldn't last for long.
Okay. Let's
Mittal.
Yes. Mittal.
Yeah. Hey guys. I think one crucial aspect when it comes to Russia and its sort of cultural projection within the West is that it has been.
Yeah. Am I still on, or is it a new person?
No, Mittal is speaking.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
it's
so
a
sorry.
new person. Don't worry about it. I think this projection is completely hollow. I think this projection is mainly kept up by certain Twitter personalities and perhaps media personalities at large. If you actually do even like the slightest investigation of Russia's popular culture, you will see that it is very much the same Sodom and Gomorrah that was invoked earlier. Just the difference is that if you criticize that kind of a Sodom of Gomorrah, you will get a knock on your door. It is a far better enforced Sodom and Gomorrah than it is in the West, and to simply project, I guess, personal resentment uh, from your side to the West, and to sort of like cheer for this quote unquote military operation that Russia is enacting on Ukrainian soil is, I think, I I think it's sort of, one is almost forced to psychologize it, because it is fundamentally politics of resentment at that point, and there's
Yeah.
yeah, there's very little to add to it. If we look at figures such as like Bronze Age pervert, or or various other online commentators, it's mainly, the argument is that well, we might as well cheer for the stranger, because the home is not the home that it used to be, and I just think it's incredibly unfruitful, because the fact of the matter is that you are simply not familiar with the stranger, and and what he will bring is an entire new world of not so pleasant things, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I would just add that the stranger does not want what is best for you. And as I look back at, my own career and the degree to which I rubbed shoulders with pro-Russian forces, I don't think that they, and I certainly don't think they like me anymore. But at the time, they liked me to the extent that I was creating some kind of chaos or some kind of demoralization or alternative view in America and the West. It wasn't like, oh, we want what you want. We want a strong West. We want a revival and a new spirituality. It was basically, oh, you're the type of person who might invade the Capitol one day and create all sort of chaos. And so it was I guess I didn't perceive it at the time, but I perceive it now. There's this asymmetric relationship. And I don't like engaging in that kind of thing. I mean, I don't have any harsh feelings towards Russia, but I think it's been made very clear that Putin has very harsh feelings towards the West, and he defines himself as anti-West. Thus, whatever hurts the West is good for him. And that's just very bad and not anything that I think we should be sympathizing with. All right. Advi, you have the floor.
Sorry for the gap. My phone froze. But like I was thinking, somebody earlier said that this, Putin's daughters, they lived in the West, and I don't think they lived in the West. I think they lived in some Slavic country. But the point was that a lot of these Russian power people, they have kids who live in the West, and I was thinking, that's subjectively, it's like an unpatriotic thing to do, right? And
Yeah.
but the other aspect of that is, so does China, and for that matter, even you look at like these European countries, like even the Western ones more aligned with America, a lot of their kids are living in like, let's look at like the continental Europe. They might be living in London or even here in New York City, and same with the British guys, right? So it's like, I don't think that's like a really good point. When you look at it, the elites, they're part of a different team than most of us are, and I think I like the elites. I just want them to think about guys like us a little bit more. So I like it's kind of an older point. I guess I came in a little bit too late for that to be relevant, but I just feel like it should be stated that that's something that everyone does. It doesn't make it okay. It's incredibly unpatriotic. But even Xi Jinping, who's probably the most like competent leader in the world today, like it or not, his daughter, I think she's still in Boston or something, right? So it's like I don't think that's like a total knock at it. And obviously, I'm not a Putin fan or anything like that. I don't really take men who get plastic surgery seriously, but I just want to give my 2 cents.
All right. Actually, I think this has been a good conversation. We've gone about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Master Sheikh, would you like to sum some things up or hit some points that you missed?
Well, I think regarding the topic of escalation, I think that it was pretty valuable. I appreciate that you mentioned the fact that Russians might start to fund some radicals, maybe some terrorists or something like that. That wasn't something that I was thinking of when talking about escalation. What I was sort of more into the current media fear mongering of thinking about nukes or things like that. So that was definitely a good point. We should probably explore it a bit more further on. But right now, I was reading some tweets about reports that, well, Russia probably, Putin is planning to do some false flag attacks within Russia itself to blame it on Ukrainians or NATO or something like that. So we're in interesting times. We should keep watching the situation and, well, hope for the best. Let's hope it doesn't escalate too much.
Yeah. Well, there's been so many false flags and potential false flags throughout the Ukraine crisis that it's very, I mean, the Malaysian airline was one, which might have been shot down by Ukrainian forces or not. I mean, there's just a lot of dubious things that have happened, and I definitely could see something like what you just suggested happening very soon. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And special thanks to Master Sheikh. And also thanks to everyone who chimed in. Very good perspectives. I definitely learned things doing this, and that's what I like. So, anyway, I will talk to you guys soon. Have a good weekend, and we'll do something like this next week. All right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.